This one I thought was really the big one. Top cloud challenges, those big four, security, managing cloud spend, governance, lack of resources, expertise. I tell you, I'm slightly confused. I know the security's been up there for a while, but I'm slightly confused about it. Let me ask you a dumb question. Do you think when the companies say security, they mean, oh, our data is going to be stolen or compromised in the cloud? Or do they mean some sort of, because really the cloud providers, to the best of my knowledge, have never been hacked, unlike many, many data centers across America have been hacked. So really
Right.
cloud is in many ways actually safer than the data center. So why
Yeah.
do you think people are so concerned about security in the cloud?
Yeah, and it's really not about necessarily the base security of the cloud providers. It's about that shared responsibility model where organizations are responsible for certain aspects of security. They have to take advantage of features to secure their data in those storage buckets so that it's not hacked, which many have been hacked.
Mhm.
It's responsible for them to keep that security up to date and to make sure people have the right access. So there's a whole set of capabilities or responsibilities in that shared responsibility model that are the responsibility of the actual user of the cloud. And
Mhm.
many organizations are still adapting to that model. They're having to learn, we're moving from perimeter security to really how we configure and protect those workloads.
Mhm.
And it's a shift in the approach to security. So I think organizations are getting there. One of the big risks is just mistakes, that people forget to set something up properly. It's not that the feature isn't available in the cloud, it is, but they're
Right.
not doing it properly.
Right.
Or they set it up properly to begin with, and then a change occurs. And with that change, something opens up. I saw a recent breach where somebody had created like a backup of a database because they were making some transition and they hadn't properly secured that. And so that remained open for a period of time. So
Mhm.
that's the common problem. It's the cloud users part of that shared responsibility model.
And it seems like the number two and number three item are so intertwined with managing cloud spend and governance are
Right.
separate, yeah, very intertwined. But that the fourth one there is interesting in terms of lack of resources, expertise, and that I hear more and more these days, like, well, we're having a hard time hiring a fully qualified cloud professional because it's so complicated, it changes so fast, and they earn such higher salaries at this point.
Right.
Is that the problem that these cloud professionals are rare unicorns and just hard to hire?
Yeah, I wouldn't say unicorns, but they are harder to hire. Obviously, since it's a newer domain of expertise,
Hmm.
the breadth of expertise in these areas isn't as great in terms of finding people.
Hmm.
They do command higher salaries and are in demand more.
Right.
Many companies are turning to cloud MSPs to help fill some of that gap. So we asked
Yep.
about that this year. But yeah, it's just something that's growing. Now we are seeing more sort of traditional infrastructure and operations professional, become more DevOps oriented, become more cloud savvy. So there's also a
Hmm.
training aspect to this where you have to learn cloud somehow. You're not born knowing cloud.
Right.
So you're not probably, unless you're very new to your career, you probably didn't learn it in school. So you're going to really
Right.
be learning it on the job.
It's an interesting feeling. Yeah, as I've been hearing it over the last year or so, I thought, well, cloud has been around since 2008, 2010. I mean, depending on how you want to look at it, and yet still 10 years later, we're still there. There's no glut of cloud professionals. That's for sure. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. And we've been tracking these challenges, for many years, and they have declined slightly, but not drastically, because a lot
Hmm.
of these are not a once and done effort. You really
Right.
have to be continually managing spend, continually managing security, continually governing your environment. That requires typically automation to do that. You can't do this all manually. And so
Hmm.
that's new sets of tooling, new sets of processes, and new sets of expertise.
And of course, this one is very big. And by the way, we're using screen share. We didn't even have to take a shower for this whole event because we're just looking at screen share this whole time. Isn't that nice?
Yes, that's great.
So 72, this is the horse race. And this is like really a big, obviously no surprise that we're the relative position of the top three, but I guess we'll see it in the next slide. But this is really interesting. It's like Google Cloud is coming on strong. It seemed like it
Yes.
was a distant third before, and now it's like, hey, Google Cloud is looking pretty respectable.
Yeah, and I think it's been interesting because if you look at the year over year numbers, which I think is your next slide there, they
Yeah.
definitely saw the most growth. And we have been watching for the last few years, there were a lot of people. If you look at the people that are experimenting with the cloud or plan to use the cloud,
Hmm.
those numbers have been pretty big for Google over the last few years, indicating there were a lot of people with interest in the Google Cloud. And now we're seeing this has happened is that they're starting to use that Google Cloud.
Hmm.
The other phenomena, if you look at your slide 78 there, that I want to highlight with this is when we look at this by cloud maturity.
Hmm.
So this is a factor we've been tracking for a number of years, beginner, intermediate, advanced.
Hmm.
And this shows you the different cloud providers. So there were two really interesting things this year.
Hmm.
First of all, in the beginner
Well,
category, sorry, that I think it
that
was
my fault. Okay,
78. There you go.
78. Yep, yep,
Yep.
yep.
In the beginner category, for the first time, Azure is used by a higher percentage than AWS at
Uh-huh.
56 versus 44.
Wow.
And
Okay.
we didn't used to see that in the past, but I think what's happening here is twofold. First of all, Azure over the last several years has gotten more mature, and so it becomes a very viable option for people that are just getting started. And
Hmm.
then secondly, the people that are beginners now tend to not be the most, forward leaning, get to the
Right.
cloud first type of companies. They're maybe
Right.
not the laggards, but maybe somewhere in the middle.
Hmm.
And a lot of those people are use a lot of Microsoft. They're very comfortable with Microsoft as a vendor.
Yep.
And so they're likely to start there given that Azure has matured so much over the last few years.
Hmm.
The second really interesting piece in this is in the advanced set of bars. And you can see the third bar down is Google at 41%. But if you compare Google in the beginner and intermediate levels, only 20% use it, but it
Right.
jumps up quite a bit to 41% in the advanced users, and it gets a lot
Interesting. Yeah.
closer to Azure and AWS. So
Uh-huh.
what that tells me is that as you become more advanced, first of all, naturally, you probably use and experiment with more clouds and you start to use them for specific use cases or services. And so with those advanced users, they're looking to Google to take advantage of it, maybe not for as many workloads as the other
Hmm.
clouds, at least at this point, but at
Right.
least for certain select workloads.
I would think particularly data analytics and artificial intelligence on the Google Cloud platform, and which would tie in with the advanced users.
Exactly. And also certain industries perhaps that, are tied into AdWords heavily, for example, might find a
Mm-hmm.
lot of advantages in then using the analytics within that Google platform. Also, we have seen now over the last year that Google is really trying to make a bigger push with partnering and going through the partner channel in order to get to the enterprise. And so that also may be helping them see this adoption increase among the advanced users.
And way down there at the bottom, but coming on pretty strong, and the kind of like Alibaba from 2% and then 7% for invest. So I mean, Alibaba doesn't get many headlines when it comes to the cloud. I think they don't compete in North America,
Yeah, and
but I wouldn't be surprised if they're on their way up.
yeah, I mean, we don't have a lot from China. So if this was in China, we would probably have a very different picture. We
Hmm.
do have Asia Pacific, um, but they have started to make some inroads, especially within Europe at Alibaba. So we may be seeing some of that there, but they've kind of stayed fairly low. What has surprised me is VMware on AWS
Yes.
kind of going up, and then
Hmm.
also Oracle actually, which is relatively new. Now,
Right.
Oracle again is probably limited workloads, specific applications, specific use cases.
Hmm.
I interestingly just saw an article, I think it was today, about Zoom, the
Yeah,
platform that we're
I saw that.
using,
Yep.
starting to go to, or is going to be using the Oracle Cloud. And
Yes.
Oracle has made some moves to make it more expensive to use Oracle databases on AWS and Azure. So
Hmm.
for companies that want to stay on Oracle and go to the cloud, I'm sorry, AWS and Google, not Azure. They've partnered with Azure. um,
Okay.
but for companies that want to keep their Oracle database and maybe go to the cloud, they may be taking advantage of the Oracle infrastructure cloud for those workloads.
Interesting. Yeah, because it seemed like Oracle was a laggard there for several years in the cloud, and it seems like it's gaining respectability as we go forward.
Right. I think small footprints still, but
Mhm.
starting to at least appear on the leaderboard, so to speak.
The interesting piece about the VMware on AWS is that it seems to me it's a little bit of a crutch platform. Is that maybe some larger institutions, I'm not sure, moving onto the cloud and they need that VMware mirroring between the on-prem and the cloud.
Yeah.
And there was a while I wasn't sure what was going to happen with VMware, so we moved heavily into the cloud era. But they've turned out to be quite a connection point between on-prem and the cloud platform.
Yeah, and they provided the workload mobility, which I think is a big factor. The fact that they've made it pretty easy to take, your existing technology. It's not the cheapest option in the world, honestly, but
Yeah,
it's
right.
but it enables you to leverage the tooling you have, the VMs that you have, create that workload mobility, leverage your expertise. You're using the entire VMware stack. So it's not really like using AWS, although you can link to AWS services. It's
Mhm.
really more like using VMware in a hosted scalable
Right,
data center.
right. So if you know VMware, suddenly you know the cloud. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly.